to introduce Sam Kenyon, who has written the book Music and Lyrics for Miss Littlewood that will be opening at the wrong theatre, at the RSC shortly. So they're in rehearsal in Stratford, and I am very lucky to be able to go and see a little bit of that rehearsal. So that's one of the things that we might want to talk about at some point, about this whole process of rehearsing. But I'm just going to ask Sam a few questions about the process, and then we're going to open it up for questions in a little while. Okay, so welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being in the middle of rehearsal. So first I want a little bit about your background and what led you to writing this particular musical.
So I did a literature degree. I focused quite a lot on critical theory, just for those of you who might be interested in critical theory, Foucault and Derrida, and queer theory, Judith Butler. So I was in the early 90s at university, and then got into performing in musical theatre as an extracurricular thing at university, and then left, became a secretary in publishers for a couple of years. That's what I call my wilderness years. And then did the course at the Royal Academy of Music, the 1 year postgrad in performing. And then spent the next 12 years on one level doing that, performing, acting, and the first 7 years of my career was in fringe work, relatively either unpaid or low paid, but with someone called Tom Morris, I don't know if you come across him, at Battersea Arts Centre, and Erica Wyman at the Gate. This was those days, so we sort of grew up with those people, and alongside that, I also did a teacher training certificate at the Academy, so I'm a voice teacher and repertoire coach, and was doing that really to both as a vocational teacher, but also to enable me to do this other creative work. But when I didn't teach, I found that I missed it, and when I taught all week, I found that I hated it. So I had to find a balance of those worlds. And I always thought that I might, well, when I turned 30, a long time ago, I thought I would write a novel. And so I started writing a novel, and I'd always written a diary or had some thoughts and written poetry, and I think I wrote a song when I was about 22, because I'd heard some Sondheim and went, oh, well, I'll go at that. And never really wrote music, and sort of didn't write music, and then also met a guy called Elliot Davis. Do you know Elliot Davis? We were partners together, and then we wrote a show together as well called Best Friends and Butterflies, which we won the Vivian Ellis Award in 2000 or something like that, and then it was very disappointing because nothing ever came of that. And so I was writing, and there's another thing that I did there's a Kurt Weill piece called The Firebrand of Florence, which for the Kurt Weill centenary, a good friend of mine is Jeremy Sams, and he was overworked at that point and offered me a job that he'd been asked to do, which was to take the book of The Firebrand of Florence and to do something with it for that centenary. And it was at the Barbican. So I ended up suddenly being thrust into this kind of very, very exciting moment. And what ended up happening was that I extracted the whole book and wrote a rhyming couplet narrative that did what the book did, but for one person, which then was read by Simon Russell Beale, which I was really glad I didn't know when I was writing, because I'd been terrified. So that was then. So I did odd little bits, and then when I was 30, yes, I thought, all right, I'm going to work on this story, and wrote this novella, really 45,000 words, and then for the next 5 years, really focused on prose writing, and I was still acting at those times and teaching, and wrote a novel called Oglethorpe, which isn't published, and everybody was very excited about it, and nobody wanted to do anything with it, so that was a great disappointment. And then alongside that, after this 7 years of fringe work, I was in a production of Sweeney Todd that John Doyle directed, which you'll all know, which started we rehearsed in an unheated fish and chip shop in Newbury, and then it went to Broadway, and Patti LuPone took over. So it was this extraordinary trajectory through 7 months in the West End as well, of an extraordinary, exciting moment in my performing life, and then continued performing. And then in 2009, I was in a production of Sunset Boulevard. Craig Revel Horwood directed that one, and I felt that I was in a featured part, really well paid, local to my home. All these sorts of things were ticking all the boxes, and I thought I just found myself in the 8-show-a-week sequence and just went, if this is what the next 20 years is going to be like, I'm going to be bored. And just a sort of, I didn't really know what to do about it. And I'd become very close friends by this point with Erica Wyman, who I'd worked with at the Gate 10 years before. And we talked a lot about all sorts of things, and she asked me if I would be interested in collaborating with her on a production of Oh, What a Lovely War. And I said yes, and I'd like to co-direct it, which was quite bold because I'd never directed anything. She went, give me a couple of days. And then she came back 3 days later, she went, I think that's a fantastic idea, just needed to just get my head around it. And she said, I want you to do the arrangements. And I said, okay, but this was in about April of that year, 2009, and we weren't going to rehearsals until January 2010. And in the August, the Arts Council, ironically, we can come back to this because they never gave Jane very much money, the Arts Council were funding Northern Stage in Newcastle for a week's workshop on this new production of Lovely War. And I said, I'll do 3 arrangements for that week, and if they're rubbish, we must be honest with each other and we'll get somebody on board to sort that out by the time we go to rehearsals in January. She didn't think they were rubbish. I didn't think they were rubbish, so I carried on doing that. So then that happened, and then began a really wonderful collaboration in a very different way with Erica. That's led to this, really, which was that Jeremy Sams once said to me that basically people asked him to do things they thought he was capable of, and then it turned out he was. And I always went, yeah, that's great hearing that from you, but how does that happen? And then pretty much exactly the same happened with me. Erica said, I think you can do this, and I said, I'd like to co-direct, and she went, you're cocky, but let's go with it. And then she said, there's a production of The Glass Slipper that I'm doing, would you write some music? And some of the lyrics need a little bit of work. And then she said, there's a production of The Borrowers, read the play, and you'll see what I mean. And I read it, and I thought, there's a song here missing, there's a song here missing. And so I then wrote about 7 songs for a production of The Borrowers, that was their Christmas show. And alongside that, Tom Morris then saw the production of Oh, What a Lovely War, and got back in touch with me and said, Neil Hannon's written Swallows and Amazons, and we're doing it at Bristol. You did amazing stuff with the actor-musician arrangements in Oh, What a Lovely War. Would you come and work like that with us? So I then was doing that and was working therefore with a pop writer, Divine Comedy, in case you don't know Neil Hannon, but pop writer who's always written really dramatic, epic, character-driven songs, working with him in putting that into play, and then also working with Tom to bring that to life with the sort of puppetry that Tom's interested in doing. So then I suddenly found that 3 years had passed and I hadn't performed and I didn't miss it. And so I then, anyway, so that's that.
But yeah, that's wonderful. I think several ideas of, I'm going to stay on track, but I've already written down several potential subjects for further discussion later. So I want you to think about this project, why you chose this project, and what's the particular interest and passion for this project.
So in 2005, I'd done 7 months in Sweeney Todd, and then went straight into a production of As You Like It in the West End with somebody called Sienna Miller, I don't know if you come across her. And it was incredibly kind of thrilling and exciting, and also awful in all sorts of ways, because it was such a difficult personal time for all sorts of people, including me. And I found that I was in a kind of, I'd had about a year in the West End there, which is a dream, right? And I felt that the more exposed that I was as an actor, the less good about myself I felt. And by complete chance, I got an audition for a show that was going on at Nottingham Playhouse. And I went to the audition and just thought, this is lovely. It was a production of Burial at Thebes by Seamus Heaney. It's the Antigone story. So I accepted, and it was 6 weeks in Nottingham. It was a breath of fresh air in all sorts of ways. And I went up there in that autumn of 2005, and playing Tiresias was a guy called Murray Melvin. I didn't know Murray Melvin at the time, got chatting to him. He was in his early 70s then, and I just found him completely fascinating. And he mentioned this woman called Joan Littlewood, and I said, I don't know who she is, and he said, she was my university. And he talked with such passion that I basically stalked him for the next 6 weeks by saying, Murray, what train are you catching down to London on Friday? Oh, that's funny, that's one I've booked as well. And I just grilled him, and he'd talk to me about A Taste of Funny, and I'd go and buy the DVD, and then I'd watch it, and then Monday morning, what's that funny, we're on the same train. And I talked to him about that. And each week I sort of did my homework, and I bought this book because of his passion, and he talked with just love, pain, loss, adoration, gratitude. There's this most extraordinary, and you go this is where the passion comes from. What was instilled in me was just what a gift she had given to not only him but all sorts of other people. And I started reading it, and I'm going to read you the very beginning just to give you a sense. So, 1. Of my birth and parentage, Caroline Emily and Robert Francis, my grandparents bring me up as their own. Of my aunt Carrie, her brother Bob, and sister Melinda, and Kate Daisy, my mother. That's the chapter heading. A Cockney maid in 1914, long before the pill was a twinkle in your mother's eye, finding herself in the pudding club, if she was too young to know that Mrs. Bunyan up Gately Road could fix you up with soap and water emetics for 9 quid, might, all the same, have heard that strong purgatives taken in a scalding hot bath with a glass of gin could fix you up. But in any case, hot bath... It's nightmarish. I basically hurled it across the room. And I read about 3... I got a bit further than that. I read about 3 chapters. Oh, she's insufferable. I can't possibly read about this woman. It was end of a difficult year, right? End of a difficult year. Anyway, so then I literally put this back on my shelf. Didn't finish it. 3 chapters went... I'm sure she was lovely, but I can't read her book. And bearing in mind, I'd read Derrida and Foucault, so it wasn't that I wasn't up for a hard read. So, and Judith Butler, for God's sake. So anyway, fine. Then did Lovely War, 2010. And then... regularly in January I wake up and nobody wants to have singing lessons in January, and you've just done a Christmas show, you've got no income and no prospects. And most Januaries I go, oh, it's happened again, what do I do? When I was about to turn 30, I went, you write a novel, that's what you do, Sam, you knuckle down, you just don't eat very much and just write a novel. So then I went, in 2013 I woke up, and it was one of those, and I had had a pretty good couple of years by this point, so I went, oh, that's miserable. And Erica was about to give birth, and hilariously, brilliantly, she'd given me all my work up until that point. And I went, and I'm not going to get any work out of her, she's on maternity leave, which is a terrible thing to say, but it was, well, I didn't remember. So I remember going, it's all right. And then I just saw the cover on my shelf, and I picked it off the shelf, and I started reading it again, and I was clearly in a better mood. And I read her story, and she was the daughter of an unmarried teenage mother, born in Stockwell in 1914. And Methuen published this, and I went, oh, that's really interesting for a start. And then I carried on reading, and she got a scholarship to a local Catholic school, and she was taken to see Gielgud at the Old Vic, and she thought he was a bit too decorative. You're cheeky. And then she won a scholarship to RADA. And in the beginning of the 3rd year of her time at RADA, she was called into the principal's office, and the principal essentially said, I'm not crazy about your work. And she went, you know what? I'm not crazy about yours. I'm going. And then walked to Manchester. And that's when I put the book down, and I went, okay, there are 2 idioms that could deal with this. Musical theatre, well, movies and musical theatre. And I'd always wondered about that moment when Julie Stein went, oh, anybody heard of Fanny Bryce? Or Sondheim went, I've just read this biography of Gypsy, do you fancy having a read? Or Lloyd Webber went, Eva Peron, she's a great idea. And I thought, oh, maybe, and I'd always thought maybe I will never have that moment. And then on reading that, I thought, this is possibly what that might have felt like, and I hadn't done anything about it by this point. And Erica very kindly took me for lunch, which is a really sweet thing to do, and I was really grumpy, and I just watched a Disney movie that I'd managed to track down that I'd seen by chance when I was 9, and I'd fantasised that would be the show that I'd turn into a musical. I started wittering on about that, and then she clearly wasn't very interested in it, and I said, or I should just write a musical about Joan Littlewood, and she went, that I'd be interested in. And it wasn't a professional conversation, it was a friend's conversation, but I went, okay, fine. So I rang Murray and said, don't know if you remember me, but he went, I'm going to forget you on every train going together. So I said, can I come and talk to you? I've got an idea and I want to come and talk to you. And I was very, very early on in my process, but interestingly, I recorded every interview that I then did because for my own research, my own purposes, but I also thought, if nothing comes of this, I'll just give them to British Library. There'll be interviews that I've done, and not that I'm a very good interviewer, but I'm better than I was. So I just started talking to him again with an idea for how to do a show. And one of the first things I said, let me tell you a bit about my conception for it. By that point, I had finished this, I said, I'm thinking of Seven Jones. He said, oh, thank fuck for that. So Jones swore like a trooper, so I will do my best, but I will inevitably swear like a trooper. Sailor, rather. And he said, thank fuck for that. He said, I said, why? And he said, everybody comes in here and says, what was she like? He said, I just want to say to them, which one? and I was so thrilled that I'd, in some sense, got something that was true, if for want of a better word, you know. I mean, when I read my Roland Barthes, I know the author's dead, and I'm really committed to that as a principle. But I just also thought, okay, there's something in this, and he put me in touch with a guy called Johnny Wallbank, who'd been in the jazz trio in Taste of Honey, and then. The other thing, so it's funny, there's a question coming up about what's next, and I might be a bit circumspect about it. I'm jumping to it because there's that sensitivity about, do I tell people? Because I thought it was such a brilliant idea that everybody would just steal it. And I'm not, as you might have guessed, not very good at keeping my mouth shut. And I went to see a show at what was the St. James's Theatre, what's now the other Palace. And I met a friend of mine called Tim Jackson, who's a choreographer and MD, brilliant guy. And he introduced me to a friend of his who I hadn't met. And Tim said, how are you doing? And I went, oh, do you know what? I'm doing all right. But basically, I need somebody to introduce me to Barbara Windsor. His friend went, I can do that. I went, are you kidding? He said, no, I worked with her last year. Do you want me to give you her number? And I went, no, I'll send you an email explaining the project to you. And then you said, within a week, I had Barbara Windsor's number and had an appointment with her. And that was a great lesson. The other thing that I did alongside that was go to one of these open, they're called open forum, what's that Faye McDermott runs with disgruntled and devoted and disgruntled.
Yeah.
They're called open space or open something, where the first rule of them is the right people turn up. And it was so gratifying because I saw it and I could have cried because there's that fantasy that Peter Rankin, who's written the other biography, I rang him and he said, I can't talk to you at the moment, I'm finishing my biography, which is why I'm a bit cross with him as well. But so he said, and then talked to me for 20 minutes about the fact that he couldn't talk to me. So it's really easy to fetishise the people who don't roll up. And I thought that is such a brilliant lesson as a person, let alone as a writer, to go, the people who say yes to your interviews are the right people, and they're the people you need. Don't worry about the others. And back in 2004, when I did Sweeney Todd, Jeremy Sams introduced me to Stephen Sondheim. And I have to practice calling him Steve because at dinner I called him Sondheim to his face. So forgive me if I say Steve, it's because it's a hard one. It's hard one that is. Anyway, so he then said, if you're ever in New York, look me up. And about a year later, I woke up in the morning and went, I'm booking a ticket to New York. What was I thinking? I waited. Anyway, so I then stayed in touch with him. And Merrily We Roll Along had just transferred from, it was Maria Friedman's production, had just transferred to the West End, and I went to see it. I'd seen it in the Chocolate Factory and I saw it in the West End, and I wrote Steve an email saying, just wanted to let you know, saw it last night, it's transferred beautifully, it's brilliant. He wrote back saying, did the rest of the audience feel like that? And then I told him about the Joan Littlewood thing, and Murray had told me that he'd met Steve in a bar in Manhattan in 1960, who wouldn't want to be there, right? So I said, I gather you met Murray Melvin, and he wrote back saying, don't remember meeting him, but we'll never forget his performances. And I wrote back saying, did you meet Joan? And he wrote back saying, I never met Littlewood, but Hal did. Steve. I was in hospital with Erica, who'd just given birth, and I read this out and I went, I'm going to New York next week, which I was, that wasn't a fabrication, I was going to New York for something, and I said, do you think I can ask him if Hal would talk to me? And she said, I think so. So I wrote back, I said, coming to New York next week, do you think Hal might talk to me? And he said, don't know, I'll ask him. Wrote back and just said, Hal can't wait to reminisce with you, call this number. So I rang that number and spoke to Hal's assistant and made the arrangements, which involved me getting off a plane at noon and being in Hal's office, 16th floor of the Rockefeller Centre, at 2 o'clock. And was about to put the phone down when the guy at the other end of the phone said, oh, by the way, Sam, I just got to say, Hal wanted me to impress upon you that this interview will last as long as you need it to last. Again, I could have cried. I was just like, wow. And what was amazing about that, the link with that for me, was the love that people bore Joan. This is, say, Hal did a production of They Might Be Giants in 1961 in Stratford East that he co-produced with Joan. 50 years later, he signed away his afternoon to a complete stranger. And that is where the passion, if you like, comes from in terms of this woman. And by the way, there were people I interviewed who hated her and still gave me 2 hours of their time. So there's such passion surrounding her, and she's such a fascinating figure. and finding out the things that she innovated at Stratford East, TIE, drama therapy, actually, theatres that reflect the communities in which they find themselves. And I've got a line in the show which is, you might as well, why don't people know my name, says Joe Littlewood. You might as well ask why we know so many unremarkable men and so few remarkable women. And the entrenched misogyny in the fact that you can say to, I would say 9 out of 10 actors don't know who Joan Littlewood is. They probably know what a lovely war, and it's so shocking. Anyway, sorry.
Yes.
That's where the passion comes from.
Well, that's quite a passion, quite a story. I'm going to move you on, and probably we will only be able to have one more question because then I'll open it to the floor. So I'm going to ask you about something about your writing process, but I want within that for you to think about the collaboration. So the writing process, the workshop process, and the way collaboration has fed into a project that is entirely yours.
Yeah, and therefore definitely not entirely mine. Yeah, absolutely. So I started writing a few songs, and I'd write the odd scene. And as part of the Fun Palace, does anybody know about the Fun Palace or not know about the Fun Palace? Is the thing that Joan never managed to get off the ground with Cedric Price. The Hearts Council kept pulling the plug. And Stella Duffy set up this thing in 2014 to honour Joan's centenary. As part of that, the RSC were doing the Fun Palace. Erica said, our Fun Palace is about behind the scenes. And we'd love some new work to be there. And it was just my friend asking me to do something. It wasn't in any way official. I went, I've only got 3 songs. That's all right. So I wrote another 3, and then took with a couple of performers and Nigel Lilly, amazing MD, he's a friend of mine. We went to Stratford. The other one that I'm saying, Stratford West, I think it should be called now. We went to Stratford and did a presentation of 6 songs, a bit of a chat, and then Erica and I did a Q&A afterwards. And it was on the basis of that then 3 months later, I got a, sorry I could get upset, I got a commission, which was so thrilling. And it was a commission just saying, we'll give you, we want to develop this piece with you, and so then began a collaboration with the RSC, and Pippa Hill is the head of commissioning, literary department, and I was introduced to her, and she said to me, right, she said, let's talk about this, and we had a meeting, and she said, what do you need from me? And I said, deadlines, and then proceeded to give her a whole series of deadlines. And the amazing thing about a company like the RSC is they're not in a rush. And the irritating thing about a company like the RSC is they're not in a rush. So I basically, but then I also realised that I was driving it, and I was passionate about it. And I said, I'm really happy to have a collaborator. I've worked really well with a guy called Phil Porter. Have you come across Phil Porter? Who's amazing, delightful guy, great friend, and he's brilliant. And I said to Pippa, I'm really happy to have a collaborator. I'd really love to have a go at writing the book. I've never done it. I've written other things. They weren't published, but I've written other things. And I'd love to have a go. So I started doing that, and I wrote, I don't know, a few scenes. I wrote some more songs, I wrote some more scenes. And then I shared my ideas and my thoughts about this with Pippa. And at the end of that meeting, she just went, we don't need any more ideas in the room. If you're happy to collaborate with me as your dramaturg, I don't think you need a collaborator. So I then started to work with Pippa on the script and developed it, and again set deadlines. And alongside that, Bruce O'Neill, who's the head of music, said, we should have a meeting about this because it's a musical. And so I had a meeting with him, and I played him all the songs, and this was in 2016, and he said, write what you need to do, there can be no such thing as too many workshops, and Matilda took 7 years to write. And I said, I'm not as busy to mention. So I was like, it isn't very far away. I went, it's a really long way away. And so, but then I also realised that nobody could do it apart from me in terms of generating the material. So I then said, and my dad had a terminal diagnosis around that time, and I thought I want him to have a shot at seeing something of this. So that was in April 2016. And so I said to Pippa, I'm going to do a first draft by September. I'd like notes from you. I'll redraft in October, and I'd like to do a workshop in December. And talking somewhere like the RSC, you can say things like that. And they go, all right, blimey, okay, we better do that then. And she said, well, but that's really short, it's a really short time. I think it was about June, actually. I think I gave myself about 3 months. And I said, if I don't meet my deadlines, we'll change them. And I was working on another show at the same time, and that was in production, Vice Versa, and I called Vice Versa. And I went and bumped into Pippa in one of those things. She said, got you your money for December. And then you can say things like, I'd like Claire Burt and Nicola Hughes and Victoria Hamilton Barrett. Could you call them? And that is the thing that is really difficult to get used to and marvellous. This is an amazing resource, and I feel so lucky. That's why I could cry. I feel so lucky and privileged to. So, my friend Erica then came on board as the director. Tom Piper is designing it. Lucy Hind is choreographing it, who just did Girl from the North Country. She's astonishing. So then you get this extraordinary collaboration. People get really excited. Tom got really cross that I hadn't mentioned John Berry, who's the designer. He said, nobody ever talks about designers. And I said, everybody says there's somebody missing from my show. If you want to write a show about John Berry, I'll definitely write you some music. Anyway, I've got a line about John Berry. And Murray said, you've got to have Avis Bunnage in there. Oh, I've got Avis Bunnage in now. She's got a song. So there's all these things. Anyway, so everybody had, but what was interesting about it, so therefore the designer has had an effect on the script. And Joan's practice has had an effect on the script. I take very seriously sometimes Steve's line that content dictates form, and the way in which I take that is not that I'm choosing the content with an idea of this, but that meditating and reflecting on the content and going with whatever that is brings its own form, and that might be a poetic form, that might be a song form, that might be a scene form. And I've really, that's helped me relax many, many times, just go. And also, I've not read his book, the first one, or I've not read the second one at all, I haven't got it. The first one, I haven't read it cover to cover, I just open it up. And every single time, a bit like this one, I could open this and we go, I glanced around at the other characters to be interviewed. They were waiting in open cubicles. Brendan snored. Muggeridge gave a satanic smile. You're in a world that is extraordinary. And immediately, and sometimes the book is like that, and I just found it so useful as a resource to, from a writer, but writing academically, and writing about process, and writing about failure, and what failure means. And so there was one song that I was really struggling to work out. And so I sort of think, it's a hilarious thing to say, but therefore that book is one of my collaborators. I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm collaborating with Stephen Sondheim on this, but that definitely, to have that sense of reading somebody else's experience about, here's a lyric that I love and is rubbish, and telling us why, and you go, but you've written so many other amazing things, yeah, you're right, you can say it's still great. So and having that sense of humility and also, one of the other things about songs that didn't make it into my production, my show, there may be some more before we finish rehearsals, but songs that didn't make it in, there are two reasons for it not to go in. One, well, the only reason for it not to be in is because it's not right, or it's not good enough. So it doesn't matter if it's really, really good. It's not good enough. If it's not right, it doesn't go into the show. So I don't have any problem with cutting and editing. I quite enjoy it.
Good. Thank you.
Does that give
That's fantastic. Some of the things that I picked up as you were talking were this idea of false starts and not everything works. That you try many things and you just keep trying and you just keep moving in
Who
new
can
directions.
draw the right line first time, says Joan.
There you go. But also this idea of workshops and collaboration being something very productive.
Yes, and so the first workshop, we had 7 Joans and a Jerry. Alex Lawther, anybody know Alex Lawther? So he was he was the young Alan Turing in the Generation Game. What's that called? Anyway, lovely actor, really wonderful actor, and he came in and we had seven women, Jerry and Pippa, Tim Jackson, Sean Green and me in a room together for a week, and we read the script through. That was Monday. Tuesday, I did some suggestions. Tuesday evening, Pippa said, you need to make some bold cuts. This is where the interval should be. I stayed from 5 till 8 o'clock in that room cutting, and it was at the moment when I went, if I cut the whole of Act 1, that will really save a lot of time, that I decided it was time to leave. I was getting a bit reckless. So I did a major cut and did some bold cuts for that, and then on that Friday we did the presentation of that. And it's interesting because at that moment, the people who came are really key. It's not only doing the workshop, it's who sees it. And Erica, as my closest friend, said, basically she said to her team around her, you are going to have to persuade me to do this show. It's Sam, it's Joan, and it's a new musical which we should be doing. She's Deputy Artistic Director of the RSC now. And so what we had there was Claire, who's the producer of The Other Place, where they do these 2 festivals of new writing, Griselda, who's a senior producer at the RSC, the head of music, Bruce, amongst other people from the RSC, as well as Erica. So then they were able to drive. Greg Doran couldn't come. We did a second showcase for him, and Pippa was there, of course. And so what was required in that, and I think that's really tough in workshops, because yes, there's a whole thing that's about process, but actually the number of workshop presentations that nobody rolls up to is heartbreaking. And I was incredible. I said to Erica, isn't that amazing? They've all come. She went, I told them all to come. That's why we're doing it on this day. This is the only day that they could all be here. So in order to make sure that there wasn't an accusation of nepotism on Erica's part, or an idiotic choice of some material that was substandard, she needed to get other people on board, because she also hadn't read any drafts or seen or heard any of the music. So she kept aside and let another member of her staff, who she trusts completely, to do it. And then every now and then would say, how are you getting on with Sam? No, don't tell me, don't tell me, don't tell me. So that she could remain as objective as she possibly could from that presentation.